welcome once more, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here, and thank you so much, Gosha, for inviting me over. And especially that's the topic that I think is especially crucial, and that's one of my favorite one, also based on my expertise. My name is Kuba Słowik. I'm from Poland, and actually, my full name is Jakub, but I never use it. But probably it's easier in the international context to use Jacob because Kuba is pretty Polish name, and but it's also sometimes funny because every time there when I'm traveling and I'm working in the international environment, I'm introducing myself as Kuba. People are like very surprised. By this name, I'm saying, yeah, Cuba is like a country, by K. So sometimes that is the easier way to remember that. I'm psychologist, and my main expertise in psychology is actually the teenage and adolescence development and support. I've been working last 10 years actually in the youth work field in the many different areas. I started as a therapist, and for the 8 years I've been conducting the psychotherapy group for teenagers as well as individual consultation and counseling and diagnosis. And in the meantime, I was also conducting many of workshops for teenagers themselves, as well as the parents, teachers, also other psychologists and other youth workers in general term. So I have kind of an expertise in this field in the many different areas. Now I'm working mainly in educational field, also education for teenagers. My favorite part of my work is every year during the summertime I'm going for the youth camp as a counselor and psychologist, and that's the best 10 days in my entire year when I can spend every time with them and actually trying to, support and help and provide them with some guidelines and knowledge and anything that they might have that might required of me. And today the topic is very neurobiologically based. I will guide you through the different aspects of the teenage changes. And the main idea of mine, the main purpose of this webinar, I guess, is to challenge some myths, challenge some frustration, because what is important to mention at the beginning with is that the teenage period is definitely the crisis time, is definitely the challenging time, not only for the teenagers themselves, mostly for them, obviously, because that's the very intense period of time for them in changes in any kind of areas and life domain. But in the same time, I guess sometimes it might be frustrating or might be hard and heavy time for the caregivers, parents, and youth workers as well, because everything changes so much, and sometimes it's hard to follow up. But in the same time, that's the very crucial moment of life. I also think that is the most beautiful time. You know why I like working with teenagers the most? Anytime I'm having some classes, workshops, or any possibility to spend time with them, afterwards I feel that I can everything, that I have energy to change world, that I have energy to recreate anything around me. And that's something that I think is the most beauty part of teenage time. And in the same time, the most challenging time is that they are lost within the mind, within the body that is changing, and in the same time, many adults doesn't know how to properly support them, or what is sometimes more hard part of it, that they are neglected or dismissed, or dismissed in a way that we tend to think that okay, they might be over dramatic, but in the same time they are going through a lot of changes. Let's start with some myths and typical behaviors that might be yeah, challenging for us as the adults. So how does the teenage behave? First of all, they are rebellious, they are experimenting and focused only on peers, and tend to neglect other adults, tend to not follow or not listen to adults, being only focused on one another. They definitely are egocentric, impulsive, and easily engaging in the potentially risky behaviors, which is also followed by emotional instability. They tend to be very vulnerable for any kind of criticism, any kind of feedback, and they perceive world black and white. So they are very strict to their own mindset and to their own opinions. But those behaviors are only the outcome of so many changes that are happening during this period. And those behaviors are actually important for learning and achieving the most important skills, most important competencies that we all need as the adults in order to be self-reliant, in order to be efficient, in order to actually be able to put our mind on the things and to put that in action, whatever we want to achieve. So they are learning independence through the rebellion, and they are developing a lot of interest and gaining new skills through that, forming friendships and discovering themselves, discovering their own identity, discovering their own potential, learning how to control themselves, how to guide themselves, and how to satisfying their needs. By that, they are gaining a lot of life experiences that is the map for them what to choose, what to avoid, and to what to engage themselves in. By that, they have built self-esteem. And finally, develop the system of values, morals, worldview, which is important for any kind of for any adults, for any of us as the inner compass through which we are making decisions and through which we are directing our own life. And teenage period or the adolescent period of time is the time of intense changes in all of the areas as I mentioned. There are different definitions, obviously, but we can assume we can stand now that this is the period between, let's say, 12 up to 20 years old. And first of all, this is the very period of transitional transitions from being dependent on the surroundings and especially parents or any kind of caregivers up to getting independence and self-reliance. So it's the transition from being child up to being an adult, from attachment to parents to seeking peer acceptance and finding their own relationships, building their romantic relationships, friendships, and learning how to communicate, how to collaborate with others, which is important skills not only for the private life but also for the any career and any work life. So they are starting with being, as I said, black and white in their thinking, perceiving anything in a very strict way, up to learning and recognizing the relativity around the world, being focused and sensitive for nuances, understanding the complexity of the concept around them. That's also followed by the intellectual development through the very like high or hyper logic up to the abstract concept. And finally, they are seeking the new experience that influence and directly affects the formation of personality. Through the neurobiological point of view, the personality is shaping up to 25 years old. So this is exactly the moment when why they are gaining new skills and there are some temperamental changes in order to enter the adult world, being, let's say, fully prepared. I mean, theoretically, at least fully prepared for the all of the challenges and obstacles that the adult person might enter. And this is the time of changes, not only because of the transitional, because the transition is mostly social aspects of development, but also the inner changes of the body and mind. So first of all, changes in body and appearance, changing a lot and like very quickly and promptly, which sometimes is very scary for them. I think everyone of us remember the time when we were the teenagers and having a lot of complexes and having a lot of doubts and insecurities because one day the voice changing for boys, the physical aspects of the sexuality sex are changing as well. The matter of the body itself is changing and it's changing non-linearly, which means that at some period of time, and especially in the early adolescence, they might look, not very attractive, at least for themselves, because this change is very chaotic. So, and in the same time, those changes are followed by emotional and cognitive development, which influences directly self-esteem, and then in the same time, the social impact force them to make an important life decision, which they have every right not to be ready yet, because if there's a lot of changes, it's easy to get lost within yourself, and in the same time the society, the way the civilization is built requires us to make a lot important decision, to start first works, first jobs, sometimes to decide about the schools and about the future, not having a full capacity yet for making such decision, and especially in early adolescence. um, so that also leads for the time for discovery, which I think is the most beauty part of being a teenager. Through the neurobiological point of view, we have the greatest capacity in this period of life for learning new skills, for mastering new skills, and for developing our nervous system. So this time is followed by gaining new experience, which is affecting and influencing all of the neuro capacities, all of the neuro changes, which I will mention later on. So that's starting with, it's followed by the discovering identity, so deciding who I am and who I want to be. In the same time, building a strong bonds and learning how to relate to others. So exploring friendships, first love, first important relations, first sexual experiences as well in the later adolescence, hopefully. Reflecting on beliefs. You know, I think it's something which is universal for all of the culture, which we can observe whenever there are some revolutions, whenever there are some important social changes. There are always teenagers who are the first on the streets to manifest and to trying to push or force those changes, because this is the moment when they are trying to fit into the society and find their own place and being heard by others. And so they are testing those social rules. They want to change them, and especially nowadays in this very time when we have, I would say, the social revolution in terms of the generational gaps, when the new generations have completely different values and completely different norms compared to the previous generations, and they are by that preparing themselves to become adults, because from the evolutionary point of view, to the functional point of view, the teenage time is the time for the crisis in order to become an adult. So it's for, as I mentioned already, develop identity, to consolidate who I am, to consolidate different aspects, and in the same time to achieve the sense of who I am, and even so that I am changing, that I've been different person when I was kids. I had a different maybe standards or different point of view. I am still the same person, and in the same time, I am the different person than others. I can differentiate myself from others. I can make my own decision by developing my own worldview and value system. So what I believe, what kind of religions I want to follow, what kind of political parties or political approach I believe in mostly. What is my general idea for the life and for the existence itself. And it is the easiest way to do that with with the peers. That is the reason that they are socially engaged, because whenever there are so many changes and those changes are rapid, the easiest way through the functional and biological point of view is to do that with peers. So sticking to peers, it's actually the helpful mechanism for them to understand themselves. And in the same time, through that experience, they are achieving the most important social skills as collaboration, assertiveness, um, communication, being able to set up the boundaries, to build the healthy relationships afterwards. And in the same time, to make a decision who I want to be, how I want my life to look in the future, and to learn how to use my emotions as well to achieve my goals, to regulate the emotions, to achieve independence afterwards, to become the person that can make decisions by them own, regardless of the surroundings. And even if the people around me tells me that I should be the different person, or that I should decide this way or that way, by achieving the mental independence, not only the finance independence, because that sometimes is impossible yet, but mental independence, uh, I can decide for myself, and I can um, stand ahead of the people around me and say, okay, but I want this way. I am enough prepared for making this decision and to take my responsibility, because that's the moment when I'm learning responsibility to achieve the independence finally. And I think that this slide is the most important part of this lecture. So I especially encourage you now to focus up, because that explains a lot. When you can see, you can look on this chart, it's actually the easiest and in the same time the most precise definition why this period of time it's so chaotic and so challenging. It- Actually, the teenage time or adolescence time is the second time for the most intense changes in the central nervous system. All of the transformation. The first one is just after the born, during the infancy time, when the kids are learning the very basic motoric and then afterward cognitive skills. And second, the increased, the most intense time for the nervous system changes and transformation is actually happening during the teenage time. So that is the very reason that this is the period of time for the biggest increase of skills, biggest increase of knowledge and capacities and possibilities. But in the same time, it's very chaotic, so it's hard to guide and hard to follow. When you can see on this chart, you can see that the red line, it's is the visualization on the limbic system, so subcortical structure of the brain, mostly responsible for the emotional, social emotional development and the automated brain, so automatic cognitive processing. And it's changing rapidly, as you can see, peaking around 15, 16 years old, which exactly explains that this is the moment when sometimes it is the most challenging for the parents or the caregivers to actually follow and actually to respect the boundaries of teenagers, because that's a very chaotic time. And in the same time, the blue line is the visualization of the cortical part of the brain development, mostly prefrontal cortex, which is the part responsible for all of the reflective process, cognitive processing, as decision making, as taking perspective of others, empathy, critical thinking, logic, and the identity itself. So as you can see, the synchronization of those two aspects of the brain, which is the emotional arousal, the reward system, and the social belonging, with the social understanding, capacity for emotional regulation, identity, morality, and critical thinking, it's actually aligning more or less around 20, 21 years old through the developmental point of view. So we have a gap between the development of the unconscious and conscious part of the brain. That is the reason of those rebellious, of those uncontrolled behaviors of teenagers, that they sometimes cannot control themselves because they do not understand yet. The brain is changing, the emotional are arousing, the needs are occurring, and in the same time, they don't have the biological capacity yet to fully understand, to fully perform on that, because the brain is still achieving its development, its growth. And that explains this chaotic, challenging aspects of the development. Moreover, if we look on that not only from the biological point of view, but also for the integrating the social aspects, the psychological, the mental health aspects, we have a lot of vectors that are influencing teenagers, getting them easily lost. First of all, the mental and social changes, all of the social rules, the competencies gaining, consolidation of identity, the all things that I already mentioned. Then we have the biological aspect of changes. So puberty time, changing in appearance and look, then changing in the endocrine system, and finally the very intense reorganization of nervous system. And we can also add to that the social rules and social requirements, peer pressure, which is a very high aspect and factor for the development, and in the same time for the stress and anxieties, school duties, adult orders, and all of the social cultural norms that are challenging or dismissing adolescence. I'm not sure how it look in Botswana, but what I can say definitely about Europe and especially Poland, that we have this, to give you an example, we have this awful myth, and sorry for the literal translation, I don't know what is the equivalent of in English, that the fish and kids doesn't have a voice. That is the very Polish myth that is very rooted in our culture, and I believe that is the great, but not positively great, visualization of how we approach the teenagers. You need to be an adult and you need to be responsible, but in the same time, I am your caregiver, I am your parent, I am the adult person who can tell you what exactly you should do. Those are the contradictory messages and contradictory convictions. So, first, you should be an adult, but in the same time, you are a child. I am the responsible one here, so you should listen to me, but in the same time, I require you to be responsible, to take a proper decision, to be an adult. Those vectors are hard to take by them, and especially when we consider the biological changes as well. And that leads us to the adolescent crisis. Through the psychological point of view and developmental psychology, we all know that our development is very based on the crises. There are different stages of crisis on different developmental stages that are actually proning to gaining new competences, but in the same time depends on the social support and the very environment that they are raising in, that might lead to the gaining new skills, so the positive development, or that might lead to the risky behaviors, which might resulting with developing mental issues and mental disorders. But what is important that the adolescent period of time, by its own nature, it's a developmental crisis. And all of the teenagers are experiencing this crisis as well as their caregivers. And especially minding this transitional period, in many cases, and that's my work experience when I was working with parents. It's a very hurtful time when they feel neglected as well in many cases, because they spend a lot of time with their teenagers and with their kids before, or the kids who are very dependent on them, and suddenly they are like dismissing their parents or caregivers, or they don't want to follow the teachers guidelines, that which also resulting with the crisis of adults, but mostly it's the crisis for the teenagers themselves. um so that crisis have some very specific norms, which are normative and healthy to the point of view, but again, depends on the type of environment, type of raising, and upbringing. It might lead to the positive growth, or it might lead to developing some mental issues, and especially depression and anxiety, which are the most worldwide common among teenagers nowadays. So emotional sensitivity, that is the very first norm, that it's mostly the result of the very intense feelings and increasing in the limbic system, and gradual emotional maturity based on this gap between limbic system and prefrontal cortex. And novelty seeking, the very typical developmental vector of teenagers. So seeking for pleasure, rewards, new experiences, and ignoring the risking, especially because the brain is mostly focused on the positive reinforcement. Social engagement, creative exploration, and the youth rebellion. And I would like to especially focus on the last one, which is a period of rebellion, on the youthful rebellion. It's the normal and moreover evolutionary mechanism. Each teenager, through the biological point of view, need to get rebellious, need to enter this moment in order to develop the most important both psychological aspects of the functioning, as well as to prone the nervous system development. So they should experience the rebellious, but obviously it might be experienced and expressed in many different ways. So this is the moment when they want to make their own decisions and shape the world around them by themselves. So they are neglecting those standards and those rules, those social um, um, schemes that they've been raised in order to separate themselves, to build identity, to achieve independence, to develop the most important adult skills, such as assertiveness, such as self-reliance and emotional independence, as well as the autonomy in thinking, in action, and in relationships afterwards, leading us well to the economic independence afterwards, so to finding first jobs, to deciding on the career pathway, but mostly to mentally separate themselves from the parents and from the family system that they were raised in. Even so, sometimes it's brutal, but it's in the same time crucial for the development and have the very neurobiological basis as well. But it is in the same time the rebellion itself. It is in the same time the most risky aspects of the development during this period of time. Why? It all depends on the surroundings. So biologically, every teenager should experience the rebellious moment, and obviously based on the environmental factors, based on the system that they were raised in, and a lot of different psychological and biological factors that might differ among them. But in the same time, the rebellion might be also extreme in both ways, internally or externally. So when the environment does not allow, that does not create a space for the rebellion, for the making their own opinion, young people might experience in very extensive way. So it might escalate in a very risky or even aggressive action. So escaping home, neglecting anything around, up to the fights with others, up to the criminal activities. Whenever there is no proper support, no proper adults who can facilitate this chaotic experience of mind, of young and fragile mind. And it might be a result of both, either ignorance of the adults, so when the teenager doesn't have any like the role model that they can follow, or they can also be rebellious too, because you need to be rebellious towards some object, right? So if there is no object to be rebellious to, that might lead to the crisis in the rebellion. And in the same time, it might be also the consequence of too strict norms or too strict rules, both of parents and or caregivers or the teachers as well. So it might lead to either depression or anxiety. So imagine the situation: you have the need for making your own opinion. You have this biological urgency to define, to to decide of who you want to be and to explore the world around them, because that is the biological mechanism that drives you towards the development. And you are punished by that every time. So anytime that you want to express your own opinion, that you want to change something, that you want to change your look, or that you want to spend some time with your peers and you are not allowed to do so, that depends on the temperamental factors mostly, how you respond. For some, it might actually to the aggression, so to forcing the opinion even so, to being more defiant, to being more rebellious. But when there are those more sensitive kids, those more sensitive teenagers who are very emotional and, for instance, shy, that might also lead to the interiorization of this process. So that might lead to the depression. They want to define, they want to rebel, but they cannot do so. There are no proper um, opportunities, possibilities for them to do so, and they might actually be anxious of getting punished afterwards. So that leads for the depression. That leads for the cutting themselves off from anything and anyone in order to feel safer. They are still experiencing those needs and those urgency for defiance, for defining themselves, but they don't have a capacity or opportunity to express it externally, and that all can reinforce the depressive episodes, anxiety disorder afterwards, and in some hard cases, leading for the personality disorder in the adult time. There is also so-called phenomenon of the good child, the good kid. when we say, oh, they are not rebellious, they are just following, they are, like they are very well adjusted, very well adapted for any kind of instructions, any kind of guidance that they are received with, which is actually the most typical sign for the psychological crisis or psychological issues. When I was working with teenagers, actually what was the most worrying for me was not the extensive expression of the rebellious. The most worrying aspect of the teenage development was the moment when they didn't get rebelled at all. That means that either they don't have any object to get against, or that their development is limited, and that might lead for the actual personality disorder or any kind of mental disorders in the future, because they don't have these natural opportunities to gain assertiveness, to gain the space for exploring, which is proning the nervous system development. Uh, and again, leading for mostly for anxiety or personality disorders. So the rebellious time should happen naturally, more or less between 13 up to 16, 17 years old. That is the very typical moment for expressing those natural mechanisms of defying. So and especially for you, whenever you are working with teenagers and they are not expressing any signs of rebellious, it might be the red flag for you to actually work on that part with them, to check on their environment, to check on their developmental tendencies. What happened that inhibits it? That is the very first sign to be worried. So coming back to those typical norms, I would like to discuss them now and to guide you through the biological basis on that. Why it's happening and how it's happening. Because what I like the most about developmental psychology is that and especially the child and adolescent psychology, is that it's very well proven by science. So there is no opinions, it's just the science here. We know exactly what is happening in the brain of teenagers through the many repeated researches. Starting with emotional sensitivity. It is prone by the early reconstruction of limbic system. That is the very way or a very reason for emotional sensitivity. So every teenager is by default sensitive. Obviously, again, that might be differ based on the temperamental traits. Sensitivity, it is the complex trait that is connecting the sensory sensitivity and emotional reactivity of temperament, as well as the social factors of bringing with the different disturbance that might happen during the development. But anyway, and regardless of that, the teenage period of time by default is the moment of this higher sensitivity. And it's all happened and it's all starting with the hormonal disruption that have direct effect on the neural activity. First of all, the increased amygdala activity, which is the very typical for the early adolescent. So more or less 12 up to 15, 16 years old, the amygdala is highly active. And that reason that leading to the developing and experiencing new emotions, highly complex emotions, but again, because of the gap between limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, there is no capacity yet for understanding those emotions. So that the very first tip is to guide teenagers with the emotional intelligence. So to help them naming the emotions, differentiating the emotions, because they might have feel a lot of them, but not having the capacity to understand them yet. And moreover, they don't have any developed strategies yet to regulate them. Uh, so synaptic proving a new neural circuits that it's resulting the emotional instability, because it's the chaotic process, and especially in the early teenage time, the new neural circuits are increasing rapidly. So that is resulting the typical tendency of being egocentric that I already mentioned. because of the heightened sensitivity to any kind of failure and criticism. If amygdala, which is the main part of the brain responsible for the emotional arousals, and especially for the negative emotions, for the unpleasant emotions such as fear, anxiety, such as stress response afterwards, with the relation to the hypothalamus, that simply means that if the amygdala is hyperactive, they are also hypersensitive for any kind of failure because they are biologically responding too much on that. And then, by the gradual integration of limbic system and prefrontal cortex, they are learning, if there is the proper support system, the emotional and to achieve the emotional maturity and emotional regulation. That is actually kind of visible. I'm gonna be super honest and straightforward now. Sorry for that, but I think that's the good example. The hardest part for me as the a teenage therapist is to work with those teenagers around 14, 15 years old because they are hyperactive in terms of their emotions, and it's much harder to help them to guide through. I'm not saying I don't like it. It's just the most required time as a therapist to actually help them because again the brain is chaotically changing. There are a lot of reinforcement and building of new circular neural circular sorry neural activities and circuits, and in the same time, the strategies are acquiring quite slow because there is no capacity yet. But it's much visible that around 17, 18 years old, they are actually learning quite quickly, learning because they are slowly developing the critical thinking then. So it's easier for them to understand, to comprehend the emotions, and to actually be motivated to do something with that. So the emotional sensitivity leads to the specific needs in this period of attention and support, definitely, of the guidelines, of not only being self-accepted, but also to be accepted by others, and especially because they are especially fragile in this very moment during the early adolescence, to be accepted by others, to get attention, and to get this information that it's all right. You can be like that. You are all right as you are. To have joy and pleasure and entertainment and ease. That's the most important. Why ease? Because of the novelty-seeking vector of changes. The other typical developmental norms of teenagers. And it's all because of the early increased reward system activity. Reward system is directly related or connected with the limbic system also being the subcortical part of the brain. And when the amygdala is highly changing, the reward system follows. And through the learning new and achieving new experiences or gaining new experiences, they are learning mostly based on the positive reinforcement, as I mentioned. So that is all leading for the highly dopaminergic activity. Dopamine is the main neurohormone, neurotransmitter actually, not only responsible for the emotional arousal, for the emotional regulation, but as well for the cognitive functions and the motoric skills as well. So again, that also explains those all biological changes because dopamine is highly unbalanced during this moment. And in the same time, all of the new experiences boosting the dopamine secretion. So first of all, that resulting by high impulsivity during this moment, pleasure seeking, and constant need for the stimulation, for doing what I want, for doing what is mostly pleasure, because the reward system is most responsible for the pleasure. And in the same time, that proning the so-called intuitive thinking. So mostly focusing on gaining tends to ignore the risk because again the brain is focused on the positive reinforcement, neglecting at the beginning at least the negative. It does not mean that teenagers cannot understand their risky behaviors. They have the basic capacity for understanding that something might be risk, but their brain is overloaded by dopamine, So they are actually mostly focused for the positive experiences, for doing everything that might be pleasure afterwards, even so that might not be logically leading them to the positive achievements afterwards. And that also resulting by so-called hyper-rationality, and especially during this early teenage time. That also is again related and explained by the gap between limbic system and prefrontal cortex, because the development is unlinear here. So at the beginning with, so the early teenage time, they are very concrete, literal thinking, ignoring contextual information, because the context learning and understanding the contextual data and contextual information is actually related to the activity of the prefrontal cortex. So that is the reason they are hyper-rationality, so thinking black and white during this moment. And the very same reason of the gap between the limbic system and prefrontal cortex, it's resulting by high social engagement. First of all, this is all periods of teenage time. So starting from the early teenage, early adolescent, up to the late adolescent, up to the early adulthood, it's the all moment of reinforcement of so-called the social brain, which is the complex combination of the different aspects of the brain, different structure of the brain. First of all, the reward system is highly activated by the peer group. Why? Because of similarities. That is the very basic tendency of the brain of every human being. We want similarities. We are looking for the people who are alike, who we can relate to easily. And peers experiencing the same new biological, this is the biological unconscious process. So it's not even the conscious idea that I'm looking for the people who are like me. It's just the brain drives me for the people who I can relate to easily. And in the same time, all of the social activity, it's positively reinforced. So the reward system is by the reward system, they are highly focused on the peer groups. And again, amygdala is responsible for the emotional arousal, but also for the need for the belonging and social bonding, in the relation to the cortical part of the brain, obviously. So they have high need for the approval, high need for belong, high need for bond with others. Then prefrontal cortex, which is responsible not only for the critical thinking, but as well for the empathy, for understanding the context, which is to be able to acquire and to follow the social norms and behaviors in relation to the critical thinking, is developing later. So firstly, they are seeking for the peers, and they are um, less selective at the beginning with, and then they are learning how to be assertive, how to set up the boundaries. So the biggest risk by that, from the neurological point of view, the biggest risk at the early adolescent is the peer pressure, because to belong, I can do anything. If I want to be approved and I want to be accepted by my peers, so I am able to follow them, even though I might have the glimpse of idea that might be risky for me, or that might lead me for the negative consequences. But the need for belonging, because of the hyper activity of amygdala, is the most important here. And there is this part of the brain. So sorry, I have always issued to like properly pronounce like TPG, based in the temporal lobe, which is also connected with the prefrontal cortex by insula, which is responsible for the gaining the ability for perspective taking and developing the theory of mind. So the capacity for taking others' perspective, for understanding what other people might feel. So the cognitive empathy. So prefrontal cortex with TPJ and insula is, and with the amygdala and reward system, they are all creating so-called social brain. So first having a need for belonging and having a need for approval, then to understand what is happening in others' mind, and then to achieve the ability to empathize with them, and to be aware of my emotions and of emotions of others. That is the highly complex process which is happening during the whole time of adolescence. So because of that, teenagers definitely need to be socially involved, to be heard by others, and to be recognized as the actors of the social scene, or to have an influence, to belong, and to build friendships, to start the first romantic relationships. And because of the high hyperactivity of limbic system as well, that is influencing the sexual arousal and sexual development. So having the first kisses, having the first experiences with the others, building a love relationships. And then the creative exploration. New experiences prompts the integration of brain structure. So as many of new experiences they have, obviously supported by adults or guided by adults in order to avoid risky behaviors, and especially in this early period, but as many new experiences they might have, that is actually boosting the integration between the subcortical and cortical part of the brain. So achieving those independence, achieving the critical thinking and the moral compass, and so on and so on. And that is very typical for teenagers to switch easily and shift easily their interest and motivation, which I would like to highly encourage you to let them to. Because again, uh, when they are trying new things, that's actually boosting the connection and the reinforcement of the brain. And in the same time, there is sometimes a myth which I experience many times while I'm working with parents, that they would like their teenagers to be, expert in some area. So to give an example, when they had some one sport activity, they should master it. I mean, they don't need to. They might experience that and then switch to the different activities, because as many of the new experiences, then they have more knowledge, and that's promoting the synaptic growth and myelinization, so the reinforcement of the axons of the nerves or in the brain, so actually reinforcing the neural circuits. And by that, the brain is getting specialized. Any kind of exploration reinforced this process, and the prefrontal cortex is developing. So it's again self-awareness, reflection, decision-making, identity consolidation. Those all things happening in the late adolescence when the prefrontal cortex is developed. But in order to create the space for the prefrontal cortex to develop, they need to have an experience, because that is the biological and psychological mechanism in the same time. New experiencing reinforcing the neural circuits, so it's boosting the integration of the brain, and in the same time, as many experiences as I have the data to consolidate my identity, to decide who I am, what I like and what I don't like, what are my preferences, what I need in my life, who I want to be in the future. This is the same process, but experiencing the different biological and psychological layers. And finally, that leads to the increased self-control. Whenever the brain is more integrated, so the chaos becoming an order, then they are learning how to control the impulses, how to regulate their emotions, how to make a decision that are based on the data and not only on the pleasure seeking. So to achieve autonomy. And so they need to grow. They have the needs for diversity and spontaneity, for excitement, for new experiences and challenges in life, for achievement and successes, for getting inspired by others, for knowing who they are, for fulfilling their dreams, realizing their goals and passions. And finally, the youth rebellion. It's also related to the brain, but probably you already understand that it's because of this gap. Youth rebellion is the evolutionary mechanism that is resulting, and that is the consequences of the gap between the developmental vectors in the brain, right? First of all, overactive or hyperactive amygdala triggers the defiance because there is hyper emotional arousal and hyper social needs and social approval. And in the same time, the increased dopamine secretion drives the norm challenging behaviors, and that resulting the youth rebellion. And again, as I mentioned before, that makes sense. The youth rebellion should happen in the early adolescence or the early up to the the late, but between 13 and 17 years old, when the gap is the biggest. And then afterwards, when the prefrontal cortex is integrated with the subcortical part of the brain, they actually learn how to integrate their own desires, their own needs with the social requirements. So again, youth rebellion is actually the tool for creative exploration, for social belonging, and for understanding and learning emotional regulation and maturity. So they want to have an influence. They want to decide for themselves. They want to have an opinion and to be heard by others within the voice. And sometimes it's also the voice that can guide us as the adults to further reflection. For thinking, okay, maybe we are doing something wrong. So as you can see, those norms, emotional sensitivity, novelty seeking, creativity, social involvement, and youth rebellion are just the basic evolutionary mechanism and the results of the nervous system reinforcement and nervous system redesign. But in the same time, that's the only biology. Then we need to add the next layer, which is the social impact and the environmental factors that are modifying those norms. So the norms by themselves are just natural, but it's up to us adults whether they will be transformed and transitioned into a growth, or whether they might lead for the risky behaviors that might resulting in some psychological issues, psychological crises, or the mental disorders. Emotional sensitivity might lead for achieving joyfulness, motivation for the development, and ability for regulate emotion afterwards. But in the same time, if there is no proper support, if there is no proper space for exploration with some barriers and with some limitations from the adults, it might lead for the higher impulsivity, emotional liability, conduct disorders that might lead to the personality disorders in the future. With novelty seeking is exactly the same. We can gain openness, curiosity, courage for achieving, the being person who is motivated and who is going through life with the courage. But in the same time, uh, it might lead for the anxiety or the avoidance attitudes or the addictions if there is no control at all, if there is no help for the learning self-control from adults. Then with creativity, it's to become a person with passions. It's to become a person who are aware of their talents, of their potential, who are also able to use the potential and by the knowledge of themselves to actually guide themselves and to decide of the future. When there is no guidelines, when there is no space for the exploration, that resulting with the diffuse identity, with being lost of who I am and who I want to be. So with avoiding our responsibilities or being the person who doesn't know what interests them, who doesn't know who they really are. And finally, social involvement. It might lead definitely for achieving the skills of cooperation, being able to love, being able to maintain friendships, being able to meet new people, to communicate with them, to understand them, to empathize with them. But if there is no space for spending time with peers, or if there is no selection of the peers, so there is only peer pressure, which is not supported by adults, that might lead for the dependent personality, or that might lead for being incapable of loving, or to actually developing this inner conflict between independence and belonging, which I don't have tools and capacities or strategies how to combine. We all have this kind of complex between being independent and belong to others. That is the normal vectors. But adolescent time is actually the moment for understanding how to combine those two, how to find a link between those two needs. So I can be independent, I can be who I am, but in the same time, I know how to follow the rules. I know how to adjust myself. I know how to sometimes let my needs for the good of others. And the youth rebellion, the same. To become independent, to have the ability to make a decision, to take responsibility for the decision and my actions, to develop my own moral compass and belief system, which should align with the social standards and social norms. So when there is so disruption in the youth rebellion, it's either depression, anxiety disorder, or excessive recklessness, or opposition, antisocial personality disorder afterwards. So I would like to end with some red flags, and especially for those of you who might work with teenagers, what are the crucial aspects to recognize that there are some disruptions in development, that we should be especially careful with the way how we support them. First of all of the sudden and drastic changes in behavior. That might not be very clear because as you can see, this moment of period, it's by default very sudden and rapid. But by sudden and drastic changes in behavior, I mean like day by day. You know, that sudden loss of interest or sudden change of attitudes, sudden change of interest that wasn't followed by any, you know, the small changes. So it's very typical for the parents when they think, I don't recognize my own child anymore. Like, I don't know what happened. And when it happened so quickly. So when there is severe school difficulties, actually, in most of the cases, when teenagers are getting to the crisis mode, it's either because of school or either because of family disruption. So the school is always like the first factor to be checked on. And and especially when again it's the rapid change. So we had the kid who was actually motivated to school, who was gaining a proper scores, and suddenly they are avoiding, or suddenly they are getting only bad scores, or suddenly they don't want to go to schools at all, or they lost any kind of interest in any subjects. And also one of the most typical factors to be aware of and to be especially conscious to is the social withdrawal and the loss of all interest, and especially loss of interest of peers and loss of interest of the social activity. That's probably it's the factor of anxieties. I mean, might be school anxiety, phobic anxiety, or it might be just generalized anxiety, or leading to depression as well. It might also be that they don't withdraw themselves from the social contact, but they are suddenly changing their friendship, suddenly changing all of the colleagues, dropping off the previous relations that they had, and being engaged in completely new peer groups. That might also be the important factor for taking care and giving the support, or when they are obsessed only for the one single activity, which is the very typical for the teenagers, is that they change activities. They are looking for new activities. And obviously, again, that depends on the temperamental factors and many different psychological mechanisms. So, for instance, autistic teenagers, they actually might be mostly focused on the one, two activities that they want to master. But by that obsession, I mean that when they are only doing one thing and they are reluctant to do any other stuff, only one type of hobby, and especially this kind of hobby which might be risky or which might negatively influence their health, both mental and physical one. And obviously the sudden changes in emotions, the long period of the negative mood, or the very irritated, be constantly irritated or frustrated when there are no moments of enjoying. Because again, irritation and frustration might be intertwining with the positive emotions as well, but when there is the longer time, when there is only the negative mood, the lower mood, the negative affect, and there are no changes at all for the any even glimpse of the moment of the positive emotions, that simply means that it is the time for intervention, psychological intervention. And that would be all from me. Probably there are a lot of aspects to still be discussed. And if you have any questions, any comments, any reflections, and if you have any experiences of yours that you would like to share, especially, uh, feel free to do so. Now is the space and time for that. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm just checking on the chat.
I will join for a moment till I will start my session in some time. It's we are a little faster than we thought, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's still like half an hour for your questions, guys. So you can use Kuba as much as you want. But I wanted to ask about something, Kuba.
Okay.
Maybe I skipped something because I was cooking lunch for myself in the meantime. Sorry, but I was trying to listen, and I wish you fill the gap here for me, which is why teenagers may have those behaviors that sometimes are called laziness and low moods and tendencies to be depressed, because that can be based on what you were describing, but there might be other factors as well related to context. Yeah. So can you tell us something about this? Because in Botswana, there is a huge number of teenagers who are attempting to kill themselves. So there is some sort of mental crisis behind it. Even 40% teenagers may have their own experience with suicidal behaviors. So it means that there is an issue. So to what extent it can be biologically based, that they have mood disorders, and to what other factors you would highlight?
Okay, that is a very complex question. So let me answer the step by step, starting with the laziness or this kind of the behavior uh of reluctance towards the towards what
Any
actually,
activity.
because I think actually what we call laziness among teenagers is the attitude of being reluctant towards the obligations, towards the home activities most of or school activities, and it's highly related to the novelty seeking and to the limbic system rapid activities and hyperactivity of amygdala and the reward system. Again, that is the pleasure seeking. So they might be just reluctant towards everything that is not getting them pleasure immediately. They are not lazy by default. I mean, that this is not that they are lazy all the time, because that's also something that the only glimpse of we as the adults sometimes see, because we see that they are reluctant, we see that they are not follow the chores, or they are not they are avoiding the school obligations, and it's because of two. The highly active and rapid development of the limbic system, and especially amygdala reward system, and in the same time, it's because of hyperlogic. That is the very example I always give. Sorry for being very basic in that, but why I should make my bed every morning? That is unlogic, because then I will go sleep again. That is the basic stuff, because probably it's not the issue. But to give you an example, why I should learn all of those stuff in school which I'm not gonna use in the future. That is hyper rationality of the early brain, focus only on the limbic system activity, with the gap with the prefrontal cortex, so lack of critical thinking yet. That is it's not laziness. It's just being reluctant towards boring,
But
unsatisfied,
when
unpleasant
yeah,
responsibilities.
but when you say reluctant, it means that it's like oppositional, like I will resist because it's silly, or you also say that because there's no reward, they actually don't have energy in their body to do things that they find unnecessary
I
in their
would say
brains.
both. I would say both. I would say that is the complex mechanism. There is no one biological factor on leading to that behavior. So it's the combination of again, I define those different norms separately, but obviously they are interconnected and combined. So youth rebellion with novelty seeking, they are highly connected as well. So yes, it is because of lack of energy sometimes, lack of not energy, lack of motivation. Motivational system is dependent on reward system, and the reward system is dependent on positive reinforcement, and especially in the
Yeah.
hyperactivity in this moment.
But
So
at the
that's
end, if you don't have motivation, it translates into not having energy. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And then it's also because of hyperlogic, what I should do, the things which I don't use them, and especially that we need to understand that what teenagers mostly lack in the early period of time is the capacity for the um, Sorry, I just lost this word in this moment.
That can
Anticipation.
happen.
It's
Anticipate.
anticipation.
Mhm.
Because anticipation is related to the prefrontal cortex activity, critical thinking, planning,
Yeah.
and so on, and especially executive functions
Long-term
development.
perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so they might not understand that, learning those skills or doing those stuff in the long term is actually beneficiary for them.
Yeah.
It's
I will
only
add
what is
something
short
here.
term.
Yeah, I will add something here because basically Western cultures are very long-term focused. Like you need to plan your career, you need to plan your life, you need to plan your holidays, you need to plan whether you want to buy a flat or rent the flat all your life and be more agile, flexible. Yeah. So we are prone to think in long term. So we also have this pressure on teenagers. So they also just foreseen some things. Yeah, use your brain, it will end bad for you. Yeah, but they're unable to do it. But there are cultures, and I find that Botswana is that kind of culture that actually long-term planning is not written in the culture. So it's again additional factor that actually if parents are not planning in a long time, and if you are in survival mode because of poverty, you don't think in the long run as well.
Yeah.
So parents, adults may not have those skills. So it's even harder for teenagers to predict that there will be consequences of me not doing something because it's not like in the culture as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I'm grateful that you mentioned those cultural differences, because that actually lead us to the second question of yours about the depression and
Mm-hmm.
about those disruptions in the mood. First of all, what I would say it is more or less universal nowadays is that depression indeed is rising among teenagers worldwide. Actually, the World Health Organization, uh, it's alarming us that this is becoming an epidemic or pandemic among everyone, and especially teenagers. And I think this is the again complex biological and psychological and cultural factors, starting with so-called adolescent depression. That is something different than the clinical depression, because what is the biggest difference between adolescent depression and the clinical depression is one important factor. The adolescent depression, it's no, we're starting from this point. What is the very typical aspect or typical symptom of clinical depression is lack of hope, lack of the
Mm-hmm.
motivation for the future. And teenagers who are experiencing this adolescent depression, which is not the same as the clinical one, they might have the lower mood, they might have the anxieties, they might have even those cognitive aspects of the cognitive consequences of the depression, but in the same time, they have a hope, they have a motivation, they can visualize their future, which they want to, or they are driven towards.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first factor to understand the depression might be the consequences
Severe.
of
Mm-hmm.
the yes, and in the same time of the development and on the rebellion time. But clinical depression, it's actually the result of the adolescent depression, where is no space for exploration, I would say. And if we add the context of poverty, as you mentioned, sorry, I'm not the expert on the culture of Botswana. I've never been there. Sorry. So I was we were discussing
You're
with Gosha
invited.
before. Yeah, I am invited and I am actually motivated to visit once. But if we add the poverty, if we add the cultural lack of role models, if we add the no limitations or no setting on the boundaries, then
Because
all
they
of them
stay
that
alone at home, for example. Mm-hmm.
exactly, or they
Mm-hmm.
are neglected or they are abused,
Mm-hmm.
it it will just okay. I think that's the greatest idea to explain that. Uh, um, as teenage time is the very critical time for the intense changes of the brain, all of the things that are happening during this time are becoming the norm for the brain itself.
Mm-hmm.
So when the developmental stage is prolonging because there is no factor to drive it or to boost it towards a different direction, it's becoming a disorder. That is the reason why we say that teenage period of time is by default the most risky time for developing the mental disorders, because
Mm-hmm.
the brain is especially fragile for learning habits. So
Mm-hmm.
if we can say that the depression is just a normal period of, especially on the early adolescent time, as the moment of self-doubt, as the moment of being fragile for criticism, which is the normal part of culture of
Yeah.
humans anyway, but there is no support, there is no guidelines, it will
Mm-hmm.
simply becoming a clinical depression. And
So
also, if you
if
add
so.
poverty, sorry, one last thing. If you
Mm-hmm.
add poverty, which is also probably resulting with the lack of nutritions, and
Mm-hmm.
nutritions are boosting the secretion of hormones, which are
Mm-hmm.
imbalanced by default. So, that is simply heightening the normal
Mm-hmm.
stages of the brain, but
Mm-hmm.
prolonging in long time, which is becoming, unfortunately, typical state of the brain.
Okay, so what I wanted is to translate it into some practice. So it means that, okay, teenagers may have self-doubt, self-criticizing, undermine their appearance, self-esteem, saying that they are unworthy and etc., which is, like that. And they may not do things that we want them to do. And we, to some extent, we can say, okay, this is biological, that's the stage of development. But as an adult, we need to be present and to say, okay, I understand you feel that way, but how to make your thinking more elastic. Yeah, you look at at yourself from the other part of you. What skills do you have? Yeah, what are your resources, traits that you like in yourself? Yeah, so like redirect the focus of the kid from self-criticizing to some positive things. Yeah,
Yeah.
and but why I'm just telling that, yeah, that it can be one way. Yeah, or if someone has a lot of negativity, just to try to not tell them that there is a positive side, but to ask them so they produce answers. But it requires to be in contact with your teenager, like to know them, recognize the problem, being open to talk with them, not yell at them, criticize them, but say, look, I understand this is hectic, can we talk? And I understand that this kind of relationship must be built even earlier.
Yes, and the all paradox of the situation is that from the one point of view, the teenage or adolescence by itself is the moment of, rejecting adults, rejecting parents, but in the same time of highly needing them, because
Mm-hmm.
in order to get defiant, in order to build your self-esteem, you need to have kind of a mirror that you can do that based on. So whenever there are no presence of parents or no presence of the role model of adults, any kind of, it can be teacher, caregiver, or youth worker, uh, there is no natural space for exploring, because
Mm-hmm.
if there is no limit, there is no boundaries. I mean, there is
Mm-hmm.
no boundaries. There is no space for exploration, because then everything is possible technically. And in the same
Mm-hmm.
time, I think from the systemic point of view, because sometimes those things can be uh, deal through the peer group. But if we are talking now about the systemic issues here of
Mm-hmm.
absence of parents, then there are also no other peers who can help me with those,
Yeah.
because we are struggling with the same. So it's actually even more reinforcing
Mm-hmm.
those processes of feeling neglected. And in the same time, I would say one last thing, because I think it's also easy to understand this way. Limbic system, it's also the part of the brain responsible for the basic need of safety,
Mm-hmm.
automatic need of safety. Uh, if there is the high chaotic development and reinforcement of limbic system with no secure from the outside, we are not
So a
able to
lot of
develop.
anxiety, fear, basic safety is not fulfilled. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's not like developed, so it's not getting rooted in the brain afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
that leading for the depression, that leading for the anxiety disorder. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, if we add to that those tendencies I already mentioned, so the impulsivity based on the
Mm-hmm.
hyperactive amygdala and the reward system, if it's disturbed by the depressive mood, it might lead for the suicidal,
Mm-hmm.
because it's sometimes it's not even, among teenagers is a very complicated, because most of the cases when adult people are getting into suicidal, it simply means that they want to do it. Okay, it's because of depression, it's because of many
Yeah.
factors. They might not have
But
full
it's the
capacity to make a
decision.
decision, but it's a decision. Among teenagers is the impulse. So they might not actually want to kill themselves, but because of the very moment here and now and the arousal of emotions and no capacity for understanding and controlling those impulses yet, they might actually harm themselves, even if there is no like motivation for
Mm-hmm.
dying.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the
But
very tricky.
yeah, yeah. You know, when I think about you said that if there's a teenager with anxiety, self-doubts, chaos in brain, this impulsive decision taking, or not even taking, this impulsive behavior, and if you say if there's no guidance at that point, it will be like a default mode for the brain, yeah? So
Exactly.
if someone has a tendency to be pessimistic and have a lot of worries, overthink, that will be default mode for the brain for the future as an adult as well. That's scary, actually, Kuba, what
That's
you
how
just said.
personality is built, basically, because as I
Yeah.
said, personality is built up to 25 years old because of the redesign and reinforcement of the nervous system at this moment. That is exactly the same why teenage time is the period of highest risk for developing the addictions, because just the
Mm-hmm.
brain learn what is default. So
Yeah.
to give you an example, whenever you are starting to abuse substance in this very moment, it's much harder to get treatment afterwards, because the
Mm-hmm.
brain also, it's not only learning skills, it's also brain learns the pattern of hormonal secretion in this
Mm-hmm.
moment, because the hormonal secretion is by puberty disrupted. So then brain like relearn how to secrete the hormones, what is the default like metabolic state for the body. And
Mm-hmm.
when the hormonal secretion is disturbed in this moment,
By
the
alcohol,
brain,
by no,
by
by
alcohol, by
drugs.
substance,
Mm-hmm.
but also by the risky behaviors, because that
Mm-hmm.
also influences the hormonal
Yeah.
secretion,
Mm-hmm.
it simply means that there are those uh, like heavy changes in the metabolic system of the brain, of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. So the
Mm-hmm.
brain learns the unbalanced or unhealthy hormonal secretion, because amygdala is related to the hypothalamus, which is
Mm-hmm.
related to the hormonal secretion, and the
Yeah.
same time with the hippocampus, which is related to the creating the cognitive schemes, so the patterns of behaviors. That is the critical moment in adolescence.
Okay. So what if the situation looks like this, that teenager with all his fears, because you said that they have hopes, and imagine families that they don't have hopes because the adults are unemployed, they need to borrow money, and they complain about it at home, and they say that situation is very difficult. How it can impact teenagers when they can listen to that?
I would say that that also depends on the different contexts, because what can be helpful here sometimes is the peer context, right? So the peers
Mm-hmm.
group. If I come from the very like pessimistic family, or the family that I learned to not dream or to not have hope, or so on and so on, because those are also the social patterns that we are learning. But I have a peers groups who motivate me, who say, okay, no, we can do that, or I can observe my peers who are actually achieving and I can learn from them. That is the safety mechanism for development. But
Mm-hmm.
if there are no such peer groups that
Role
I can
models.
relate
Mm-hmm.
to, it again just boosting the cognitive
Mm-hmm.
scheme of feeling hopeless, of
Mm-hmm.
feeling that I have no future,
Mm-hmm.
and leading to depression afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So I would translate it to that tip for parents, for example, that
Mhm.
it's better not to talk about economical breakdown in your family in front of your kids,
Exactly.
because it can stress them, traumatize them, and make their brain pessimistic as a default mode, also as an adult. Yeah. So if you have any problems, it's better to talk about it when kids are not at home, for example. Yeah.
And
But on
especially in
the
early time.
anytime.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, because like 18, 19, okay, that actually might be helpful for them to also
Yeah.
understand the complexity, understand,
Yeah.
maybe develop some strategies. But when there's 13 or 14 kids when with this hyperactive limbic
Mm-hmm.
system, and they don't have any positive reinforcement, yes, that will lead definitely for the for some in like important psychological disruptions afterwards.
Okay, I will ask something else. But guys, you have a chat. You can post something on the chat. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment. It can be a surprise. If you think that Kuba is too far from your reality, he's also open to learn from you. So it will be nice if you comment something like this, like a feedback.
Definitely.
I know that you are not very good at feedback giving people here. This is a culture that's people are very nice, and giving feedback is just difficult. So I'm just telling you that we are open. But I wanted to ask about, do you agree with this kind of okay, I will give the floor to Caroline because I still have something to ask.
I'm not sure, Caroline, because we cannot hear you.
Yeah, Caroline, again, we have the same issue as before, that we can't hear you. So maybe you can just leave the meeting and get once again on the link. So join again, and maybe that will fix your problem. And you guys, please, we are open for your comments and questions. But I wanted to, is it like this? So if I have a family that is prone to pessimism, or we are in a stressful situation due to economy and, I don't know, psychological abuse at home, but the teenager has other role models. You mentioned peers, but can it be another adult that will save them from that? Yeah.
Definitely. Sometimes it's that the teacher can be that kind of person, or just a youth worker, just a therapist, the other adult who are the safety figure that I can relate to, that I can get defiant against, that I can explore, through. So the person who is set up some boundaries, but I can also get rebellious towards.
Yeah, that's great, guys, because it means that each of you may be also support for some teenagers. Caroline, you back, and I saw that maybe now you will not have technical issue. Let's check.
I hope so.
Oh,
Can you
yes, success.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Kuba, for that wonderful presentation. It has opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I can't
Caroline
wait.
also has teenagers at home, so
Yes. So I can't wait to have you here in Botswana. I think we'll learn a lot from you here. So that's an invite. You are invited to come over.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really curious, and especially after a lot of stories that Gosha told me already, I would love to come by there and check. Also, maybe be useful for some psychological help as well to learn the different culture, because I think that Gosha already mentioned, which I was lacking, and honestly, guys, I was really stressing out before the lecture, was that I was asking myself how much is gonna be useful for the culture that I don't really know. I mean, I have some information from Gosha, but again, it's not the same thing as to experience that. So I was trying to give you some universal knowledge about the brain, because it's regardless of the culture. But I'm really happy, Gosha, that you are asking those questions, provoking this discussion, because that actually we can relate those like universal tendencies of the human brain for the intercultural context and cultural context, which might be, as I mentioned, environmental factor leading for the positive or negative development.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to find out from you. You talked about the rebellion time. Like, how do we let the teenagers go through the rebellion time without it spiraling out of control? Because what I see is that I don't know if it's only in our culture, but we expect a teenager to remain the same, to be always smiling, to be always the same child that we know. And then when they're moody, when they're opinionated, we tend to feel they are getting out of hand. And as a result, we want to put our foot down and show them that we are the one in authority. So somehow I feel as parents, we are contributing to the red flags that we are talking about. We are contributing too much to the mental health of our children, because what we are trying to do here in our own, we believe that we are trying to instill discipline, only to find that by trying to instill discipline, we are making matters worse.
That is a great question, and I would start that in my opinion, there is a difference between the word discipline and the setting up boundaries. Even though they might seem the same, I think the setting up boundaries is that giving teenagers some frame for the development. So there are because they might, and especially minding those developmental biological tendencies, they might have some um boundaries that first of all that can get defined against, and secondly that also can lead them but discipline means to put
But
on the
boundaries, you mean that if they are offending a parent, you may say, look, in our house, we don't talk like this to
exactly
Ash. But when
exactly
Caroline says moody, they can be grumpy, they can have outbursts. But if they don't cross the limit by offending you, I would say, okay, let them yell sometimes till they will not tell that I'm, I don't know, stupid. Yeah. So
yeah but
that's the boundary.
yeah.
Let's define that. Yeah. What I
Yeah, exactly,
expect.
exactly what I mean. You know, the discipline, in my opinion, is to put on the child my own moral, my own worldview standards. So that I want to be, I want you to be exactly the same. I think that the great example to explain it easy, the easiest way, it's to show you, it's the thing with the religion. I'm not sure how it's in Botswana, but like to give you an example from Poland, like we are highly religious Christian country, and so we as the adults expect the children to also follow the same religion. So to give an example, as Gosia mentioned, setting up the boundary is saying, I expect you to be a proper person in the way to respect others, to respect me, to do like the minimum chores, or to take responsibility for your actions up to some moment. But in the same time, you might believe different things. You might believe, you might find your own pathway to believe or to give a meaning to the world. That is the difference between discipline and the setting up boundaries. That discipline means that I expect you to be exactly as I want you to be, to just to fulfill my inner image of yours, which by the way is impossible because how come I can know what you think of me like fully. But setting up boundaries is to give a frame. Okay, there are some behaviors that that I do not agree on. Uh, in order for you to be safe, because my responsibility as the person is to uh, secure your safetyness, and there are some, I don't know, time that you should come home, or some activities that I won't allow you to, I don't know, for instance, I want you shouldn't allow your, I don't know, 13 years old kid to drink alcohol even as an experiment. I would say that when they are 16, 17, if they are experimenting, that's not something to be maybe too much punished for. But you know, to give some basic ideas, okay, what is all right and what you shouldn't do at all, but in the same time letting for the exploration. Because another example, you know, what I mean by discipline is like sometimes parents, you know, signed up their kids for some extra activities, right? Like, I don't know, sport activities. And then they are forcing them to be always well prepared. I mean, do you really need to be well prepared for, I don't know, playing football? You can be bad at it. You will get consequences anyway from your peers. It's your decision. You need to be maybe well, or like at least um averagely prepared for the school activities. But anything that you are doing after is your decision, whether you want to master it or you just want to try and make a trial out of it, and that's all. So that's what I mean between setting out the values and discipline. So to give the bare minimum of the rules that I acquired you to follow, because it's the law. That's the first factor, to follow the law requirements, and the second, the so like, I don't know, moral codex, let's say. But in the same time, you can look for your own
And
meaning
safety.
for life. Yeah,
And
and
safety.
safety.
So
Yeah,
let them
low safety.
explore in safety limits. But we will have to sum up this discussion because in a moment we start an next lecture. But when I think about the context as well, we can imagine that it's not always safe outside. This is the wild country as well, yeah. And in when you live in the town, maybe it's not that dangerous. You can, when you go out, there might be risk, like sexual predators, like access to drugs. So it's still dangerous, yeah. On the villages, it's even worse because there might be wild animals. And to some extent, kids for their own good, for protection, they need to follow what the adults are saying. Don't go there. Yeah, this is, and there's no discussion like, why I don't see anything, maybe I can go. So, you know, to some extent, for the safety of the kids, they shouldn't discuss. But on the other hand, if you want your kids to be self-efficient, to be mature, to find their own path, to risk in life. So if you risk, you achieve something. If you don't risk, you will not achieve things. Yeah, you need to let them take this risk when they are still with you, so you can protect them, because otherwise they will cling to you and they will not have this boldness and freedom to explore.
One last
Obviously,
thing.
yeah.
Sorry, Gosia. Sorry, I think that you finished.
Yeah, but what I wanted to ask, if you want your child to cling to you, never leave you, be like you are a hen with chickens, you know, overly protective, and you don't want your children to like leave the family and live their own life, go ahead. You can be very authoritarian parents, disciplining and punishing and keeping the child with low self-esteem, if it's your goal. If your goal is to have an independent child, knowing how to take decisions, being responsible for actions, you need to let them rebel.
Yeah, and if I can build on that, one last thing, it's all about equipping, not forcing the pathway. That would be the difference. So based on and build on that what you mentioned, yes, if there are some risky potential situation or the environmental factor that might be very dangerous for you, okay, it's to set up the boundaries and it's to limit the possibilities to actually encounter this dangerous situation, but to explain why, to equip them with, first of all, knowledge, why we require them, why we are worried, and secondly, to equip also with the strategies or with some important tools what they can do if they will possibly meet the situation anyway. So the parents is like that would be the last sentence of mine maybe. The parents is like the gosh, sorry, what how is the in English latarnia morska? Like
Lighthouse.
lighthouse, yeah, exactly. Lighthouse is the point. It's like a lighthouse. It's to show the horizon and to limit the horizon by the lights, but to let swim anyway. And that may be the metaphor I would like to leave you with. And with that being said, I thank you so much once again for having me here. And Gosia, thank you so much for the great moderation and adding the context. I'm super appreciated, and I wish you to be this role model, and in the same time to also reflect on your limitation, because to be a role model, first of all, you need to be aware of your own motivation, as Gosia said. Do you want your child to be a low self-esteem person struggling with anxiety, or you want them to be self-reliant, even so that might be harmful for you?
Yeah. And we're not even saying this in provocative way. Sometimes parents have hidden agenda to keep one child at home, so they will help me when I'm getting old, yeah, instead of letting them all, you know, explore. Okay, I've